Gospel reading this morning is from Luke chapter 15. Just going to skip around a little bit, but we're starting at the very beginning. All the tax collectors and sinners were gathering around Jesus to listen to him. The Pharisees and legal experts were grumbling, though, saying, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So Jesus told them a parable. We're skipping down to verse 11. A certain man had 2 sons. The younger son said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the inheritance." Then the father divided his estate between them. Soon afterwards, the younger son gathered everything together and took a trip to a land far away. There he wasted his wealth through extravagant living. When he had used up his resources, a severe food shortage arose in that country, and he began to be in need. He hired himself out to one of the citizens of the country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. He longed to eat his fill from what the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, but I am starving to death. I will get up and go to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Take me on as one of your hired hands.' So he got up and went to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. His father ran to him, hugged him, and kissed him. Then his son said, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quickly bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Fetch the fattened calf and slaughter it. We must celebrate with feasting. Because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field. Coming in from the field, he approached the house and heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what was going on. The servant replied, 'Your brother has arrived, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he received his son back safe and sound.' Then the older son was furious and didn't want to enter in, but his father came out and begged him. He answered his father, 'Look, I've served you all these years, and I never disobeyed your instruction. Yet you've never given me as much as a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours returned after gobbling up your estate on prostitutes, you slaughtered and fattened the calf for him.' You slaughtered the fattened calf for him. Then his father said, 'Son, you are always with me, and everything I've heard is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive. He is lost. He was lost and is found.'" This is the word of our Lord.
Thanks be to God.
It has definitely been an interesting week, and I have one more thing to add to the list. Thank you, Matt. We've been on spring break, but I haven't spent much time relaxing, so doing things mostly I haven't been able to do for a while. On Friday of last week, our daughter and I packed up the car and headed for Kennewick, mostly to celebrate her birthday with my mom and dad. My mom's birthday is the same day. We stopped at Starbucks at the Dalles along the way, and I happened to bump into our old district superintendent, David Nieta. He was also traveling with his daughter on the way to Walla Walla, going to our annual youth, convocation for our conference at the United Methodist Church. He invited me to join him for what they're calling a table talk, which was going to be the next day, First UMC in Kennewick. These talks, we get together, like you guess from the name, sit around a table and then have something of a presentation and a discussion of what's going on in our denomination right now. It's presented by Mary Hike, the district superintendent from Seven Rivers, the district superintendent I started with when I wasn't a pastor yet, but before then. One of the people there was my favorite teacher from high school. My old English teacher, who I hadn't seen in over 30 years. And even after all this time, he still talks to me like a teacher. David, what do you think? Speak to me. I forgot now. My favorite part of meeting as a people of God is to listen to people and hear their stories and try to discern what's important to them, what's in their hearts, and what motivates them. And Lent is a time when we do this corporately and individually. We just take a little time to look back in our lives and see how we can move forward and be better. Even when we are supposed to be on vacation, there is still a sense of movement at all times, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Whether you leave the house or you stay home and watch the news, we know our world is always changing. And we are always changing, whether we are aware of it or not. Some mornings we wake up and wonder how we ever got there. How did we get here? Where did those years go? How did I get to be this way? Someday soon, each of us will leave this world, and we need to be ready for what God is preparing for us next. Anyway, you can't help but think about where you've been when you travel back home, even though it's changed so much. Kristen, our son, joined us on Sunday. He had a retreat for his band that he went to. Orchestra. Sorry. So after we had gone to church, we met up with them. And I always sit in my favorite place in church. No one does that, do they? But me. You guys always move around. But my favorite place is the balcony. It's a big old church. Sometimes I'll sit in a different pew, but I'm always in the balcony. We had my sister's family for an early dinner, and then went to my parents for cake and presents. And for the next couple of days, we went to the usual places in the Tri-Cities to shop and visit over coffee. Then on Tuesday morning, I got up early and headed for the coast, while the rest of the family went and picked up our dogs at the kennel and went to visit Kristen's Aunt Yakima. My journey took me over White Pass, which is still not quite green, but still just beautiful up there. Rimrock Lake is still frozen over, there's snow everywhere. And my destination, at last, was Bay Center, Washington, which is the home of one of my old churches, where we listened to a bishop from Uganda, and he gave a presentation of the mission he's doing. He told this story of how he grew up one of 14 kids, 7 of which died, mostly in childbirth. And so his mission is focused mostly on moms in childbirth. So he's created or built a little hospital. He's also built a school. From his past, that's where his future's leading him in this mission. He was very eloquent in his British accented English and called us all to serve Jesus and save the lost. I wasn't really expecting that, though. Why I went was because he was installing a friend of mine from the area into his church. And she will be a deaconess and heading to Africa as a missionary as soon as she can come up with the money. And while I was there, I was able to visit a couple of my former parishioners who didn't come do the service, my piano player, as well as a friend of ours who's now 98 and who was at my first church, Raymond, which is now closed. From there, I headed to Astoria, one of my very favorite places on earth, and then headed back to Portland. It was a time to reflect on where I've been, the people who have touched my life, and where I want to go next. Our lives are made up of many journeys, many beginnings and endings, and we head towards our final passage from this life into the next. We struggle to make sense of the present, and hopefully we can make enough sense of the past to recognize the importance of all those steps we have already taken. To understand our passage from Joshua, we need to read back a little bit to the story. Joshua has just led the people of Israel into the promised land. Moses is dead, as is just about everybody else who could have even remembered Egypt Joshua leads a new people into what is essentially a new land for them. This is the first they've ever seen it, even though it is their promised ancestral lands. So they've crossed the miraculously dry bed of the Jordan River. And you might remember they place memorial stones on the bank, one for each tribe to mark this historic day. Soon we know they will go back and conquer Jericho, but first they must celebrate the occasion, for this is a big day for them. That time in Egypt is over, a new day begins. After the long journey out of Egypt, they take time to remember where they've been and prepare for what lies ahead. Our reading skips over why they're at Gilgal. I have to tell you anyway, even though you probably won't like it. During the 40 years in the desert, we're told the people stopped practicing circumcision. Because they're on the move, I guess. And the first thing God does when his people arrive back home is to renew this practice. Sorry, this is a story that makes all guys squirm. So, they have stopped to circumcise all the males and allow them to heal up. That's why they're at Gilgal. Certainly this is something to be done not to be done as an adult, but as an infant, so we won't remember it, right? I feel sorry for all those older men. But it's an important occasion because it's actually memorialized here in Scripture. Not only did this ceremony signify their renewed relationship with God, they had to go through circumcision to be in a right relationship with him. But from there, then they can move forward and inherit God's promises. But it's also a time of cleansing from the past. We read, then the Lord said to Joshua, today I have rolled away from you the disgrace of Egypt. So all the bad things in Egypt they put behind them. Rolled away is not exactly the literal translation of Gilgal. It sounds like the word. Anyway, so the place was called Gilgal as it is today. We too, through baptism, prayer, and confession, receive God's forgiveness for our sins so that we can move on to what God has in store. As we too look back on those important days, those important times and places in our lives, this passage is a significant memory for the people of Israel, as our histories are important also. One may overlook this story, though. It's kind of small as we read next the conquest of Jericho and many more exciting things, which I'm sure you'd rather hear about than circumcision. During Lent, we often focus on the regrettable things we have done, but like the Israelites on this day, we also remember that regrettable things have happened to us, and we seek to put those behind us also. Lent is not a time to just feel guilty about it or bad about ourselves. Rather, we seek to be healed and move on, grow from our mistakes and bad experiences. We don't learn anything from them. The suffering and hard road we traveled through is wasted. And so having renewed a relationship with God, they celebrate the Passover at Gilgal. I had to look back and see if they continue to do the Passover through the Exodus, and they seem to. They don't usually note it or take note of such a special one, though. The next day, we are told God stops providing the manna for his people to eat, and for the first time, they eat from the crops of the land. At this point in the narrative, they're not yet into their own part of the story. So wake up, all you. I know it's not an exciting story, but don't nod off on me. Certainly, they must have felt like they'd finally arrived, not quite in their tribal areas, but from which they have been exiles, those ancestral homes. I can't imagine what it's like. It's not like going back home because they've never been there. They don't know it, but it must have felt almost like they've come into their own. They're all grown up. They're producing for themselves. They don't have to wait for God to feed them. Certainly they must feel anxious about what lies ahead, the battles and the steps, but also God's promises being fulfilled. Perhaps they kind of felt like they were leaving the home they know to strike out to the home, for the home that is their own. Perhaps they're glad to finally be at the end of such a long journey, but a new adventure was just beginning. However, this doesn't mean God has set them loose to fend for themselves. So if you think this reading so far hasn't been too exciting, listen to this. Okay. When Joshua was near Jericho, this is after circumcision and Passover and all that fun stuff, he looked up, he caught sight of a man standing in front of him with his sword drawn. Joshua went up and said to him, "Are you on our side or that of your enemies?" The man said, "Neither. I am the commander of the Lord's heavenly force. Now I have arrived." Then Joshua fell flat on his face and worshipped. Joshua said to him, "What is my master saying to his servant?" The commander of the Lord's heavenly force said to Joshua, "Take your sandals off of your feet, because the place you are standing is holy." So Joshua did this. That's more like it, isn't it? Okay, we need that hint. Where is page 5? We need that presence of God made known to us, don't we? We don't always get it, but we keep looking still. Immediately after this, the city of Jericho was taken. Wouldn't it be easier if God worked with us this way all the time? Not that wandering for 40 years in the desert is something we want to go through. We don't want that part. But we want this part of him coming to us and making himself known to us, so that we immediately just have to flop down and worship. Too often we only recognize God's presence in hindsight. Or perhaps we'll hear that still small voice we hear in prayer, or for some of us when we're gardening or whatever. But too often we're just too busy or distracted to really hear what God is saying to us. We are more like the prodigal son, aren't we? We don't realize what we've missed until we've screwed up and can look back and see what we've done. But God is always there waiting for us to return to, whether we have sinned willfully and rebelliously, or if we've just gotten lazy and stupid or whatever. We may think we got up this morning and decided to go to church as if it was our decision, but even then, it's still God calling us back to him. Even when we haven't done anything disappointing to him or to us. God calls us here to spend time with him and with each other, receiving God's grace in the measure that we need according to him. We may not recognize just what we need on the way in. We come today not knowing or even expecting a word from God, but he knows what we need and he will provide it. But perhaps you come feeling today like you are that prodigal kid who screwed up. Maybe you're a little nervous about coming back before God, knowing you've not lived up to God's standards or even your own expectations for yourself. But God is waiting for you to come to him today. Ask for his forgiveness. Get a new start. Get the guidance that only God can provide. Jesus died on our behalf so that we could have new life now and a place with him later. During these 40 days of Lent, we too are on a journey to the promised land. Already we're on the edges of it. We're not quite there yet, though. And we wait for God's marching orders for where to go next. We don't need to go through the rite of circumcision, thank goodness. But we do need to circumcise our hearts, like Paul says, cleansing ourselves and making room for God to enter in. Remember where we have been, celebrate what God has done for us, and prepare for the journey ahead. Amen. As you will notice, today there is a special offering for the United Methodist Committee on, I don't remember the R, relief. And even though they are a United Methodist organization, they don't get supported by our apportionments. So that we need to do a special offering. For them, this is not to replace your offering to the church. Church always comes first. But this is if you can give it a little extra, please do. Ushers, come.